Well, our topic for this next session is the danger of the wrong Jesus. And it's such an important topic because, as David Young pointed out earlier, Albert Schweitzer pointed us to the fact that throughout history, we tend to make Jesus in our own image. In fact, I forget who the famous writer is who said that God made us in his image and we decided to return the favor, and now we create God in our own image. And so we don't want to do that because we want to honor Jesus as King. So David, jump in and talk to us about the danger of the wrong Jesus.
So a couple of years ago, a member of our church died at the age of, oh my goodness, I think it was 87 or 89 or something. And I didn't really know just how important a man he had been. I knew he was involved in sound engineering, but turns out at his funeral, a lot of us found out that this guy, whose name is Glenn Snoddy, a prince of a man, by the way, really revolutionized modern music. So here's what happened. He had worked in World War II in engineering. When he came out, he found a job in Nashville as a sound engineer, and soon he was mixing sounds of, everybody, Patsy Cline and Johnny Cash and whatnot. They were busy recording the song "Don't Worry" by Marty Robbins, a country musician from the 60s. And as they were recording this song, one of the tubes that they were passing the guitar through blew out, and it gave the guitar sound a real fuzzy, distorted sound. And they decided, well, because they're recording on tracks, they'll just go back and they'll record it later. They didn't stop the recording. But when they finished, they played it back and they liked it. They thought that no one had ever heard that sound before. It was just a really crazy sound. It just kind of it was a funky feel to it and so forth. And so they decided to release the song. It's the first song that ever had this sound on it. And Snoddy was smart enough to realize that this might go viral. So he actually built a device that replicated that sound. And it was called Glenn Snoddy's Fuzzbox. So if you've ever listened to the Rolling Stones song, like I Can't Get No Satisfaction, that fuzzy guitar at the beginning of that's Glenn Snoddy's Fuzzbox. This invention really did change music by distorting the original sound. Okay, so I'll tell you the story because what I have noticed is that most of us want to pass Jesus through our own personal fuzz boxes. That is, we like having a Jesus around. I mean, there's nothing better than having God on your side. And even if I don't want to follow God, I still like him voting with me. I like him, I like to think that he's standing right here with me, and whatever I think's important, he thinks important. It's kind of like Aladdin's lamp. And so what I'm concerned about is that if we're going to call Jesus King, it becomes critical that we've crowned the right one as King, and not an imposter Jesus or a body double Jesus or a fraudulent Jesus, or a Jesus of our own invention who just affirms our own traditions and our own values and our own sentiments. So what I've done is tried to come up with 5 different distortions or fuzz boxes that I think North Americans tend to want to pass Jesus through. Now, not everyone does. And the thing about a fuzz box is the distortion it presents is a real sound, and there's some truth to the sound. So each of the views I want to just briefly touch on has some truth to it, has an element of truth to it. That's why it works, because it has enough truth to it to be persuasive. But at the end of the day, each of these becomes deadly because they're not the real Jesus. And what we have to make sure we do, if we want to follow King Jesus, is to make sure that Jesus we're following is the Jesus who is, and not the Jesus we invent. So let me just name them, and I'll give you maybe a sentence or two about each. I want to be considerate of the time here. So the first one that I sort of think about is what I call the holiday Jesus. This is the Jesus who is sort of king of really what we've come to call cultural Christianity. So cultural Christianity is you're a Christian because North America is largely a Christian people. Depends on what you mean if you say a Christian nation, but certainly the Christian religion has been a real serious part of the flow of America's history, whether for good or bad, and at times not very well. But it's always been there. And so cultural Christians are those that come on Sunday when it's convenient, that you see them on Easter and you see them on Christmas. And Jesus is, the only God they have, but he's not really all that important. It's kind of like Santa Claus. He's good to you when you need him. Make sure you got a lot of toys, and he gives you grace if you need forgiveness. but he doesn't really make much of a difference in your life. In fact, I really do think, and Bobby, you've done this, you and Jim did, and I think, let's see, which book was it? Probably Discipleship, if I'm remembering correctly, that by their lives, most North Americans actually betray the Jesus of Scripture. That most North Americans, they have a Jesus who doesn't make a real difference in their marriage, doesn't make a real difference in their entertainment, doesn't make a real difference in their relationships, doesn't seem to make any difference at all in the things that we say are most important, our money, our ethics. That holiday Jesus is a Jesus who simply doesn't make any difference in people's lives. And in a sense, it's bad news that cultural Christianity is collapsing in America, because it means people are really leaving Christian roots behind. But there's another sense in which it's good news, because if you've got a church full of people who aren't all that committed, then you're going to end up having a watered down Christianity, and no one flourishes. So that's my first fuzzy Jesus. My second one is what I'm calling Traditionalist Jesus. And so in my fellowship, this seems to be a really popular Jesus. And this is a Jesus who's really interested that you get all the doctrines right and all the forms right and the traditions are all right. But I would say that most of the people who have this fuzzy Traditionalist Jesus are really characterized by fear and judgmentalism. You know, they're terrified that someone different's going to walk in, or as one person once said about the Puritans, which I don't think is really fair, but they once remarked that a Puritan is someone who is mortified that somebody somewhere is happy. And this seems to be sort of the Traditionalist Christian, that they're just mortified that someone's going to change something. I was preaching at a Assemblies of God church up in Washington, D.C., somewhere, it was New York. There's a couple of different churches in this fellowship. And when I got there, they had just went through a crisis, this church. It's a 600-member church. I'm not picking on AG, by the way. It's a great church, great people. But the pastor was telling me that they'd gone through this crisis, had lost 30, 40, 50 members, including some really key members. And I was like, what happened? I was kind of heartbroken for him. He said, well, you see the piano up there? We moved it from that side of the stage to that side of the stage. And I thought, oh my goodness, really? That really happens? But part of me is like, okay, I don't feel so bad about my church now, at least. But it was like, seriously? Would you walk out on your family for that? And what it tells me is that some folks are so interested in maintaining a set of rituals and traditions that I don't know if they even know who Jesus is anymore. And I just would warn you that one day you'll wake up and realize, that Santa Claus doesn't exist, and these traditions just aren't that important. So here's the third Jesus. By the way, I don't have to keep moving. I'm going to call this the Transactional Jesus. And this is the Jesus that Bill, and Bill's many, many books, and I've read many, many of those books too. Very, very formative to me. That Bill keeps trying to help us see following Jesus is not getting a get out of hell card. I make a transaction, I get my certificate, and now I can go back to my life. Following Jesus is not a transaction. It is a commitment to discipleship. It's a commitment to living your life as he lived his life and as he teaches us to live our lives. So the Transactional Jesus is this idea that I can say a short prayer, sinner's prayer, or I can get baptized, or I can go forward and do whatever my church expects me to do. Then I get saved. And now that I've had that transaction where I'm saved, I can go back to living pretty much any way I want to live, because now I'm saved. My best example of that, which I tell in the book, I'm not going to go into much detail on it, but it's just a neighbor of ours who lived a really bad life. I won't go into it. Let me just put it this way. It was bad. And one time I was sitting on the front porch with this group of kids, and some door knockers came up and they had us say the sinner's prayer. All of us said it. And even when, as a kid, I realized there was something wrong with this. We all said it, and then everyone went back to the criminally bad thing that was happening, very bad thing that was happening. And it just dawned on me, really, that's it? You just say this formula and you can go back to your life? Surely none of us believes this. But with our lives, a lot of us betray that we passed Jesus through that kind of fuzz box where at the end of the day, it's just a transaction. I got saved, I'm justified, now I can go back to my life. The last two somewhat bleed into each other. I'll call the fourth one, I use different names, but the name I kind of settled on was the New Age Jesus. And this is sort of a Jesus that's become popular in the among a lot of the podcasts and the blogs that you read, where Jesus is sort of the source of a meditative life. He's a great, liquid massage. And basically, Jesus is there to help me have a better life. He's there to help me get with the flow of the universe. And by the way, Jesus isn't really all that important in this. It could be any other God as well. He's just someone to help me sort of find great deep peace in myself, and to help me discover authenticity, and to help me to become all the things that I would like to become. This New Age Jesus does not resemble the Jesus of the Bible at all, but it doesn't really matter, because for those who are paying attention to the New Age Jesus, the Bible's not that important anyway. What really matters is feeling good about myself. So this is a therapeutic Jesus. This is a Jesus who is just mostly interested in making sure that I'm having my best possible life. And I just want to say about this, if that's all Jesus does, you don't need him. In fact, if you go back and look at the Jesus who actually is, he's going to get in the way of a lot of your sentiment. One of the things that Jesus comes to do is to destroy our sentiments and to rebuild them from the ground up. He doesn't come to honor our selfish sentiments. So I use one quick illustration. In this fuzzy image of Jesus, shame is a bad thing. Feeling shame. So what we need to do is learn to suppress our shame, because shame's a bad thing. But the truth is, in Jesus, shame can actually be a very constructive thing. Shame can actually bring us to the place where we're ready to change our lives. So if you, for example, have addictions, sometimes you need to hit the bottom in order to start going back up. And so in the real Jesus, we discover our shame, and then we are healed of our shame. We don't suppress it. We don't pretend like it's not real. All that does is pressurizes it. Instead, we discover why we're ashamed. We respond to Jesus, and he removes our shame. He heals us of our shame. The real thing is so much better than the fuzzbox Jesus. And then I'll end on this one. I think that for some people, the most recent Jesus is this protest Jesus, or the Shay Jesus, where it's Jesus is here to lead us in a revolution, to burn the cities down, and Jesus is here to overthrow whatever it is you don't like about the world. He's a violent Jesus. He's a Jesus who is anti-capitalist and whatever it is you want to be anti. And so I do want to say this: Christians, we literally have changed the world. If you go to our hospitals, our educational system, our universal education, our beliefs in human rights, so many of the things that we now take for granted were meticulously and over centuries built by Christians. Christians are here in part to help make the world much more like God, but we do it in a different way. We don't do it in the way of rebellion. We don't do it in the way of destruction. We don't do it in the way of rage and hatred. We do it in the way of love. That's what marks a Christian. So Jesus came to start a revolution, but it was a revolution where he said, you have to deny yourself. You have to take up a cross. You have to follow me. It's a revolution where Jesus got down on his knees and washed feet. A revolution where Jesus was willing to sacrifice himself out of love for others. I mean, Jesus could have fought from the cross. He didn't. Instead, he realized his sacrifice was a better accomplishment than the idea of bringing down 10,000 angels and striking dead. So Jesus goes about it in a very different way. And what I want to suggest is that we turn to the scriptures, to the New Testament, and we claim that Jesus. He's the right Jesus. He's the only Jesus that matters. He's better than the body doubles and the imposters. He's better than the frauds that we set up. He's better than the fake images of Jesus that we all want to see. Go back and look at the Jesus who is. The Jesus who is far better than any other Jesus we might want to construct. So the point of this is to say, get clarity on the Jesus who is, and not the Jesus that you might want. And the Jesus who is, he's the one who's king. Whether you want him to be or not, he's king. And this Jesus is not going to be overthrown. This Jesus is not going to be impeached. And this Jesus is not going to step down. He is the King of Kings, and he is the Lord of Lords.
That's good. That's really good. So Ben, let me ask you to jump in first here. Tell me what you're thinking as David's going through these 5 false Jesus.
Yeah, well, I thought it was great when I actually had the chance over the last week to actually read the fuzz boxes of kind of screening and filtering who Jesus is, and I thought they were right on point. I wanted to speak a little bit more on the topic is the danger of the wrong Jesus, and share something kind of personal that comes from me. And I'm not sure if this would be a 6 box fuzz box. It may or may not. And I could share this by just telling the story. And I think it has to do with, my interest in stuff has always been in kind of race and reconciliation and racism and things of that nature. When I was growing up as a little boy in Virginia, my grandfather was born in 1898. My grandmother was born in 1906. And so my grandfather's father, pretty much they kind of was there at the end of slavery and the Emancipation Proclamation. In fact, he was born before the Emancipation Proclamation. And so my grandparents didn't have the privilege of like having Facebook or Instagram. They couldn't, collect pictures nor their stories. So they had a family room. We called it the living room of their house. And so pretty much their walls were decorated with portraits of family members. And there I could see my dad as a little boy. I saw my dad as a soldier before going to Vietnam. And I saw my parents' wedding on the wall. But also on the wall, she had a picture of, I remember Martin Luther King Jr. She had a picture of John F. Kennedy and his brother, Robert F. Kennedy. And then she had a picture of Jesus on the wall as well. And I remember one time I asked her, I said, Grandma, who are the white dudes? And she goes, and I said, she says, which ones? I said, those 3 right there. And 2 of them, I said, well, the 2 of them look familiar because I saw them at church. They were on the, back then as, little Baptist church in Fincastle, Virginia, 135-year-old church. Everybody had no air conditioning, so everybody had the fans. And so, yeah, Martin Luther King, JFK, and Robert F. Kennedy on the fan. And then at that church, the entire pulpit behind it was this huge portrait of Jesus. And Jesus was kneeling on a stone, praying, and had the light behind his head and a crown on his head. And I remember as a little kid, it never occurred to me that was not what Jesus looked like. Because I saw him at my grandmother's house. I thought it was just, somebody took a picture of Jesus. And then, you go to Sunday school and church and you begin to, learn more about Jesus, and that Jesus, the Bible said, is the exact representation of God, is we're all created in the image of God. And I remember one day sitting in church, I would watch the preacher preach, and behind him was this big white Jesus that was overshadowing him. I think I just sat down with my family and watched Roots. And so very early on, the danger in all of this is, as a young Black boy growing up, I saw this image and portrait of someone that didn't look like me, someone that didn't represent me. And so even when I began to get older and started reading the Bible, and, Jesus is called, Lord and Messiah and Christ. In other places, he's called Rabbi and teacher. But I remember being probably my teens and 20s in college, when I'm now on my own, I'm not at my parents' supervision. I started reading that Jesus was also called Master. And so I began to see this Jesus in a way that was not trustworthy. And so what I'm basically sharing is, this is, kind of my personal story, but also a connection to other, I would say, African Americans or people of color who has looked at a Jesus that was really presented in Western culture as white and blue-eyed and, blonde hair and long. And from a psychological point, not even if it's not even conscious, it's even subconscious. There's a Jesus that I haven't questioned Jesus' race or culture or ethnicity. I did that when I was older. The danger part is that I had to overcome this hump of trusting this Jesus or this Savior, or submitting to lordship and master and king to someone who, from experiences, my own personal experiences, was oppressive and who might be untrustworthy. And it made me ask questions like, why can't Jesus be black? And, this color variation, does that mean I'm on the losing side or the downside? But if I imagine Jesus being a person of color, that may change my view. Maybe I read the Bible and Jesus is a person of color. I began to reinterpret scripture that he might be on the side of the oppressed, or he might be on the side of the marginalized. And I began to read texts like that. So I simply say that's a lens through which me, my family, people I journey with go through. And it's a continued struggle. Now, I've been a part of a racially diverse church for 26 years. And yet I still, in my mind, know that Jesus is not the image that I saw. But a lot of times, just from culture, sometimes that image is upheld in different circles. And so for me, that's one of the dangers that I see personally, and the dangers that I see for other people of color.
That's good. Bill, what are you thinking as you're listening to David and then Ben?
Well, I'm thinking a lot of stuff. I was thinking about I was wanting to ask Ben a question, but then he kind of answered it, and that was, well, how did you get to the point where you are today? And he answered it by saying he got into the scriptures and he started reading it, and he saw that Jesus was, a Middle Eastern man, really, he behaved in certain ways that were different. Well, I think about, my mind I've been educating myself on race. I've been sort of concentrating on it recently because of, it's in my face. So one of the things that really was interesting to me about this issue of white supremacy, and I want to be really careful here about white supremacy, because what you hear it, the way you hear it said on television and by pundits and people like that is not what I'm talking about. This is much more subtle. It has to do with, if the experiment is, if you think in your mind, if you say, what really would be the perfect world, what would it look like? And for me, is it basically the 1950s? Is it people living orderly lives? Everybody's cleanly dressed and finely groomed and doing everything they're doing everything they should do. They're going to church. They're obeying the law. They're responsible. Their lawns are manicured. And basically, is pretty much everybody white? Okay, so if that's my view of utopia or perfection or society as it ought to be, then what that really is telling me is that my viewpoint says that this one life, this kind of one way, is supreme over another form of life. Because I'm not really naturally thinking about, the perfect world, what I really see are all these black people doing what they ought to do, and that type of thing. Now, that was enlightening to me, about what I naturally see. So then I thought, well, what really is my ideal? And my ideal was, I live in the most racially diverse city in the United States, Long Beach, California. Apparently that's what they tell us.
Mhm.
And here in Long Beach, I think of Asian people and Latinos and African Americans and white people all kind of blending together. But they're still, people are tribal. We are tribal. And it's so complex that what it's done, two things, it's driven me to my knees and back to the Bible to try to find answers. What is the right way to go? What should I really be thinking? What is really true here? And so when Ben tells a story like that, it really does bring up all of those thoughts again in my mind.
That's good. It's really true that we all have a tendency to create Jesus in our own image. There's that famous picture that's gone around the internet and on Facebook of Klan members in a Southern church with their hoods on, and the backdrop behind them all, because they're in a church building, is Jesus saves. And it's quite a stark paradox of hatred with the expression in big letters, Jesus saves. So David Young, my question for you is, why do we do that? And what can keep us from making Jesus domesticated the way we want him to be?
Well, to be a human is to be a pretty complex part of the creation. There are all sorts of things that make us who we are. And we're socialized largely to see values of our own community. So, if you grow up in a white church, then, then this, then whites are going to confer upon Jesus the values that we always had. In fact, he's going to be the hero of whatever we think is important. And if we have no experience outside of our culture, then there's a real good chance we're never going to even think to question that. And so, but it's not just race; it's all other things as well. But race is a big one. And so, there's a tendency to confer upon heroes your values. We do it. That's what we do. The starting point for undoing that is to recognize that that's what you're doing. The starting point is to realize that, I'm reading Jesus from this location. And this is not the only location on planet Earth. There's no reason to think it's the best location on planet Earth. There's certainly no reason to think it's the only right way. And so what I want to do is challenge us to say, okay, through a process, I need to go back to Scripture regularly and look at the Jesus who's actually in there. What did he actually say? What did he actually do? And to take it seriously. The Jesus who's actually in there did things that the five fuzzy Jesus, none of them would like. Now, I'll tell you a story. I don't want to go too far on this, but I was visiting at a church one time, preaching at a church. It was here in Middle Tennessee. And a poor guy came in, and he was in trouble. He came in and he asked one of the leaders at this church for some money for some food. And this is such a hurtful thing. I hesitate even to share it. The leader looked at this guy. I just assumed the leader would give him a $10 bill. I was going to give him a $10 bill, or they had a food pantry or something. I thought something like that would happen. Instead, the leader looked at him and said, "Get out of here and don't ever come back." And the guy left. And I looked over at the leader. I couldn't believe I'd just seen that. And he said something along the lines of, we try to keep people like that out of here. And what I realized was he must have thought that was the right thing to do. He must have thought this was honoring Jesus. And it just dawned on me, this guy, I don't think he's actually ever read it. How could he be reading the Jesus of the Bible and not notice any difference there? So I would just say we need to be aware of the fact that we've been socialized to see certain things that aren't there. And the starting point is to go back to Scripture and ask the serious questions. Okay, I'm going to do what it says. I'm not going to do what I've always been told so much. I'm going to do what it says. I'm going to try to follow that Jesus who's actually in there. And that is not an easy thing to do.
So it's really discipling people to see Jesus as he really is in Scripture. Bill,
on that point, let me just say real quickly, one of the great blessings of a multi-ethnic church is that you can't really afford to see Jesus from your own race. You just realize, oh, wow, I didn't even realize there were other ways to see this. And a person who's really been moved by Christ realizes we can strip away a lot of the cultural things and find the Jesus who is. That's one of the beauties of multi-ethnicity, in my opinion.
Okay, Bill, I'll come to you in just a second. Ben, talk to us about that. Do you agree with what David just said?
The last part about the multi-ethnic church.
Yeah, that when you're in a multi-ethnic church, it forces you to realize there's, different perceptions of Jesus.
Right. Yeah, I think one thing I like to mention in our church, I look at like Revelation, I think chapter 7. You get this vision where all tribes and nations are gathered worshiping, right? And so what I'll say to our church is that, our goal is to bring heaven to earth. Like we reverse engineer this glimpse of heaven, and we try to do it on earth. So in the Lord's Prayer, may your will be done, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So we're trying to work backwards. And so, my church right now used to be a racially diverse church, and multi-ethnic. It has changed over the last decade or so, some of which is pressured by culture outside the church. And the things I think that, I'll use black and white, but black and white disciples, they began to experience things in the world that they, have brought into the church. And there was a joy and a sense of reconciliation, a sense of mutuality and learning and growth that we all experience together. And that's gradually been, changing over the last decade. So there is a beauty of it. As David said, I think it's very, very challenging to be able to do. And, one of my things I try to just research and think about and try to ask questions is, I think it's been very difficult, to be quite honest, to be the black leader, the pastor of a church that is multiracial. I tend to find that the opposite is true, that a lot of the multiracial churches actually have, predominantly white clergy and, black members. But when black leadership is there, it's very difficult to maintain that racial and cultural diversity. And so I may argue with some and go back. I think it has to do with the image that we've had of Jesus. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think there, the part I would agree with David is that we all want to have a Jesus that looks like us and represents us. And I'll just say as a black person is like, there was a time that I was like, I hope one day we'll have a black president, because it just lets me know we can, regardless of what party is. I want to see, black ownership in professional sports, because it says that we can. And there's a part of me in my life at some point I wished God was black. I wish Jesus was black. I wish there was an image of that. Because it means that we can, and that we are close to, who God is. So I think that part is very dangerous. The visual image that has been portrayed and depicted of Jesus, I think it has had an impact on how black people think and how white people think. And so you could just imagine for a moment that if it wasn't an image of Jesus being white and blue-eyed and long hair, that he was dark skinned and had dreadlocks, and that would be the image that people have seen for the last 5 or 6 decades. What that would do for black consciousness, and what it would also do for white consciousness. So I don't want to get too deep on the racial stuff, but those are just some of my thoughts of how we filter. And the danger and the temptation for me is like wanting to, and just a little bit, appropriate Jesus to be like me, and to look like me, and to know that that can't happen. I know it's not right, but there's just a part of, man, that'd be nice to see.
So, Bill, the Bonhoeffer Project works with church leaders to help them make sure that they're getting the real biblical gospel and, the biblical Jesus. What are some practical ways that you would encourage people to follow to get the real biblical Jesus?
Well, I think one of the exercises we do in the Bonhoeffer Project, and it's very enlightening. I mean, it's amazing how enlightening of an exercise it is. We have them read the Synoptic Gospels and say, okay, what did you learn about Jesus? Just read them and write down ways that you thought Jesus was making disciples or influencing people or leading or shaping people. And they all come back just like it's like the first time they've read it. And I think that helping them see what Jesus really was like, because we've been taught what he was like. We've been read in books what he was like. We've heard people preach about what he was like, but rarely do even Christian leaders sit down and read the Gospels thoroughly and make notes and ask questions about what did you learn about Jesus from actually reading the Gospels. I think this goes back to what David was talking about, is that it's so revelatory. The Bible is this only book that I keep reading over and over again, and I just keep going, I can't believe I saw, wow, this is incredible. And because this is supernatural. I mean, this is crazy. Look at this book. It just never gets old. And Jesus I never get tired of Jesus. The more you read about him, go, man, I've forgotten that, or that's in the Bonhoeffer Project. We turn leaders into disciple makers, but the thing that really troubles me, and I was talking to Ben and I think we had a group of just me and Ben, and we had a great time getting to know each other. And we talked about the last 50 years, and we've made disciples. We need to make different disciples who, for these difficult days, because we need disciples who are able to engage and live in the world that we're actually in, not some pretend world, not some world we hope we're in, but the world we're actually living in and what we're actually facing right now.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, we could keep pursuing this even further, but we'll look forward at the top of the hour to coming back for our third session, which is the Great Commission and obedience-based discipleship. So we're going to try to wrap our minds around what it meant when Jesus said, all authority has been given to me. Now, therefore, go and make disciples. So we'll be talking about that at the top of the hour.